I should have closed the curtains the day I moved in. Instead, I left them wide open, inviting the world to look back at me. Now, the world won't stop looking. It started with a lamp, a simple brass floor lamp with a slightly torn shade. I bought mine at a thrift store 3 towns over. It had a unique coffee stain on the base that looked like a bird in flight. 3 days after I moved into the small house on Elmwood Drive, I saw it. The house directly across the street had the exact same lamp. Not just the same model, the same torn shade, the same coffee stain. The neighborhood is one of those quiet, stagnant places where nothing ever happened. A kind of place where you know your neighbor's work schedule better than your own family's birthdays. The house across the street had been empty for months. Then, one Tuesday, a moving truck arrived. It was an unmarked white van. No logos. No company name. Just 2 men in gray coveralls moving boxes in total silence. They didn't talk. They didn't listen to the radio. They just moved. I watched them from my kitchen window while I brewed my morning coffee. I remember thinking it was a coincidence. Everyone has the same taste sometimes. But then I saw the couch. It was a faded navy blue Chesterfield with a loose button on the left cushion. I had inherited mine from my grandfather. It was a custom piece from the 70s. When I saw them carry an identical one into the house across the street, the air in my kitchen felt suddenly very thin. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself I was tired. I was seeing patterns where none existed. I spent the rest of the day unpacking my books. Well, I have a collection of rare first editions, mostly old maritime journals. I placed them on the built-in shelves in the den. That evening, I sat down with a glass of scotch and looked out the front window. The lights were on in the house across the street. The curtains were still open. I could see the shelves in their den. They were filled with the same green and blue spines, arranged in the exact same order. The dread didn't come all at once. It was a slow, rising tide. It started at my ankles and worked its way up to my chest. I decided to test it. I went to the kitchen and made a sandwich, ham and Swiss on rye. I sat at the table and took a bite. I looked across the street. A man was sitting at his kitchen table. He was wearing a gray sweatshirt, just like mine. He was eating a sandwich. He took a bite at the exact same moment I did. I froze. He froze. We stared at each other across the narrow strip of asphalt. I couldn't see his face clearly. The shadows in his house were too deep, but I could see the shape of his head, the slope of his shoulders. It was like looking into a mirror that was 10 seconds slow. I raised my hand to wave. He didn't move. I waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and waved back. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, watching the house. The lights stayed on until precisely 11:15 p.m. That was when I usually went to bed. I stayed up until 3:00 a.m. just to break the cycle. The house across the street stayed dark. I felt a small sense of victory. I had broken the rhythm. I had proved that I was in control of my own life. The next morning I woke up late. My head was throbbing. I walked to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a gray hair I hadn't noticed before. I plucked it out and dropped it in the sink. I walked to the window and looked out. A man was standing in his bathroom window. He was looking in his mirror. He reached up, plucked something from his head, and dropped it into his sink. I stopped going to work. I called in sick, telling my boss I had a severe flu. I spent my days behind the curtains, peering through a small gap. I started taking notes. I recorded everything he did. He woke up at 7:00 a.m. He drank 3 cups of coffee. He read the newspaper for 20 minutes. He always skipped the sports section. just like me. The synchronization was getting tighter. The delay was shrinking. It used to be 10 seconds. Then it was 5. By the end of the first week, it was almost instantaneous. We were moving in perfect unison. I scratched my nose, he scratched his. If I paced the floor, he paced the floor. It wasn't just my actions he was mimicking. It was my life. I decided I had to see him up close. I had to know what he looked like. I waited until dusk. The sky was a bruised purple, and the streetlights were beginning to hum. I walked out my front door and started across the street. I expected him to walk out his door at the same time. He didn't. His door stayed shut. I reached the middle of the street and stopped. I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my chest. I looked up at his window. He was standing there, looking down at me. He wasn't moving. He wasn't mimicking me anymore. He was just watching. And for the first time, I could see his face. It wasn't my face. It was something else. It was a blank slate, a smooth, featureless mask of pale skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a slight indentation where the features should be. It was like a sculpture that hadn't been finished. I backed away, stumbling over my own feet. I ran back into my house and locked the door. I pushed the heavy Chesterfield couch against it. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. I went to the window and looked out. The man was gone. The house was dark. I stayed in the kitchen all night, clutching the knife. I listened to the sounds of the house, the settling of the floorboards, the wind rattling the window panes. Every sound felt like a threat. Every shadow felt like a hand reaching for my throat. I realized then that I wasn't the one being watched. I was the one being replaced. The next few days are a blur of terror. I stopped eating. I stopped drinking. I just sat in the center of the living room, watching the house across the street. It was becoming more vibrant. The paint looked fresher. The lawn was perfectly manicured. My own house was falling apart. The wallpaper was peeling. The windows were covered in a layer of grime. I felt my energy draining away, like water from a cracked vase. I saw him again on Thursday. He was in the garden, planting roses. I have always wanted to plant roses, but I never got around to it. He was doing it for me. He looked more human now. I could see the faint outline of eyes under his skin. I could see a mouth beginning to form. He was growing into my features. He was stealing my identity, one piece at a time. I realized I couldn't win by staying inside. I had to confront it. I waited until the middle of the night. The moon was a sliver of bone in the sky. I took the knife and crept out of my house. I didn't go across the street this time. I went to the back of my own house. I climbed over the fence and crept through the shadows of the neighboring yards. I wanted to surprise him. I reached the back of the house across the street. The back door was unlocked. I stepped inside. The air smelled of ozone and wet earth. It was cold, much colder than it should have been. I walked through the kitchen. It was an exact replica of mine, down to the crumbs on the counter. I walked into the living room. The brass lamp was there, glowing with a soft, sickly light. I heard a sound from upstairs. A slow, rhythmic thud. It sounded like a heartbeat. I gripped the knife and started up the stairs. Each step felt like it took an hour. The heartbeat grew louder. It was coming from the master bedroom. I reached the door and pushed it open. The room was empty, but the bed was made. The sheets were pulled tight, without a single wrinkle. On the nightstand, there was a framed photograph. I picked it up. It was a picture of me, not a picture I had ever taken. It was a picture of me sitting in my living room, looking out the window. I looked terrified in the photo. My eyes were wide, and my skin was pale. I heard the door click behind me. I spun around. A man was standing there. He was fully formed now. He had my eyes. He had my nose. He had my mouth. He was wearing my favorite blue shirt, the one with the small bleach stain on the cuff. He looked at me and he smiled. It was my smile, but it was too wide, too perfect. He didn't say a word. He just stepped toward me. I raised the knife, but my arm felt heavy. It felt like it belonged to someone else. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, like it was filled with sand. He reached out and touched my face. His hand was cold as ice. "Thank you," he whispered. It was my voice. Exactly my voice. "I'll take it from here." I felt a sudden sharp jerk, like I was being pulled through a straw. The world turned inside out. Colors bled into each other. The room began to stretch and warp. I fell. I fell for a long time. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor. I felt stiff and cold. I tried to move, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. I looked around. I was in a room I didn't recognize. The walls were gray and featureless. There were no windows. There was no door. Just a single brass lamp in the corner, glowing with a dim, flickering light. I looked down at my hands. They were pale and smooth. No fingernails. No knuckles. Just a blank slate of skin. I realized where I was. I was in the space between. The place where the things that wait go when they finally find a way in. I can see out sometimes. If I concentrate hard enough, the gray walls become transparent. I can see the house on Elmwood Drive. I can see the man who used to be me. He's happy. He's planting more roses. He's talking to the neighbors. They don't notice any difference. Why would they? He's a better version of me than I ever was. Yesterday, a new family moved into the house next door. They have a daughter. She's 10 years old. She has a red bicycle with a white basket. I saw her looking out her window today. She was looking at my house. Or rather, his house. I saw him wave at her. He waited 10 seconds. Then he waved. I think he's getting lonely. I think he's looking for a neighbor.